Hey,
Hey, Brad, how's it going?
good man. My massive apologies. I can't believe this didn't make it into my calendar. I'm like,
It's all good, man. I appreciate it.
I was upstairs working out in my gym. I'm like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
It's all good, man. I appreciate your time.
No worries. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so our podcast is about your journey in music and how you got to where you are now. We'll talk about your songwriting career and all that. So, tell me about where you grew up.
Man, I grew up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Kind of Oklahoma City mainly, but I lived in a little town out in western Oklahoma as well called Cordell, which is a town of about 1,500 people. It's now called New Cordell because about half of it was torn down by a tornado a few years ago.
Oh my gosh.
So I grew up in Oklahoma and still have family there, all that good stuff. But been in Nashville now for a long, long time.
Yeah. How did you get into music?
Full on musical family, you know.
Okay.
My mom was a classical pianist and really great one actually. And then my dad was a doctor, but he was also a frustrated singer. He kind of sang in church and all that good stuff. And so I grew up, you know, singing in church and doing all that stuff. We grew up in Oklahoma, where I'm from. We're Southern Baptist. So you were in church like, you know, 3 times a week. And so it was full on singing in church all the time, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. What was the first instrument you learned? You said your mom was a piano player.
You know, I learned saxophone. I was really a drummer. I was always a drummer, you know, and but my mom, like I remember we had a band and I was in junior high, middle school or whatever, and I wanted to be the drummer in the band and my mom was not having it. She was like, no, you have to play a real instrument. So I picked up saxophone in like 7th grade and played in the jazz band, you know, and
cool.
And that's kind of how, like, whatever musical theory or anything like that I know now, comes from that. And then I picked up a guitar when it wasn't until I was in college. I was like 19 when I got my first pawn shop guitar for Christmas for $80. My parents spent on a whopping $80 on a Lincoln. It was called a Lincoln. I've never seen one before since. Worst guitar ever, but you know.
Do you have it still?
I do not. I have no idea what happened to the Lincoln, man. It's not around anymore. It did not survive.
Oh, that's too bad.
Probably a good thing. It was better like firewood than it was anything, probably. Yeah.
So that's what you learned on, though.
I did learn on the Lincoln, man. Yeah. It's my, you know, like I said, I got this little, you know, guitar for Christmas, and you know, I didn't, you know, there wasn't, you know, YouTube didn't exist back then, so I didn't know how to learn guitar. So I bought the John Cougar Mellencamp Scarecrow Songbook, which was
there you go.
Basically just his album Scarecrow. That was a huge album back then for me, and I knew all the songs already, so I just learned how to play to that songbook, and there you go.
Wow. And then did you play in bands in high school or middle school or anything aside from
the college? Because I didn't play guitar. You know, I was like I said, I sang in church, and we actually I was in like a singing group that traveled around. We had a bus in the summers and all that kind of stuff. It was
wow,
full on, semi-pro, you know, whatever that looks like. But then when I started playing guitar in college, that's when I was in some alt rock bands, you know, and so with some really random band names. You know, one was called Rat in a Core Limb Tree. I remember. I have no idea. Some guy woke up, one of the band members woke up in the middle of the night in a dream and yelled that out, and that became our band name. And you know, just horrible band names. Lickety Split, I think, was one. So anyway, I went to college in Texas at Baylor University, and we would play around Baylor, and then we'd play in Austin some too. We'd go down, it's about an hour and a half away. So we were cool because we were playing frat parties at UT or whatever, you know.
Sure. And then, what takes you to Nashville, and like, how do you start this incredible songwriting career, especially starting at 19 on guitar?
You know, it was very, very weird way I got to Nashville. I was always planning on being a doctor. I went to undergrad for medicine, to do medicine, and then I was in medical school. I got into med school, and my summer after my first year of medical school, I worked at a camp. Actually, I guess my freshman year of med school, I go to this country concert. I lived in Texas, so I become kind of a country music fan. I didn't grow up listening to really, even in Oklahoma, shockingly. I have no idea.
Interesting.
Like, you'd think I lived in small town Oklahoma, there'd be country music everywhere. I don't remember.
Yeah.
You know, it was just it was all AC/DC, and you know,
there you go.
that's all we were doing, you know, pop or whatever. And so I went to college, and you know, everything down there was George Strait and all these guys. And I remember when I was a freshman in med school, I went to this concert by a guy named Steve Warner, who I was a big fan of. He was great, just amazing talent, and still around Nashville, everybody still loved him. He was huge in Texas. And I remember just sitting. I had that moment where I think every kind of everybody that ends up in music has that little moment where I was sitting there watching this guy on stage, and I was thinking, he's an amazing guitarist. And I was like, I'll never play guitar like that, but I think I can do the rest. I think I can write and sing, you know? And so I just started writing songs in my free time, you know, in med school. And that summer, between my freshman and sophomore year in med school, I worked at a camp, I remember, and I made like, you know, $1,500. And I took that $1,500 and to the only studio in Oklahoma City and recorded 5 of my songs on a, you know, like a cassette tape back then, believe it or not. And that was my first, you know, demo batch. And so, really long story, but I send that to my one friend my big connection to the music business was I had one friend named Deb Markland, who lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she was working as an intern in college radio promotion. So I was like, so, you know,
there you go.
A friend who was an intern, you know? And so I sent my little demos to my friend who was an intern. She gave them to her boss, and her boss was a big deal, a lady named Reen Nally, who had started the Atco label in New York City, and she'd done a bunch of stuff. She just happened to be from Ann Arbor, so she was living back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I get this call in my sophomore year of med school from this lady named Reen Nally. She goes, I think your stuff's really good, and I'd kind of like to manage you. Can I take you to Nashville sometime? I was like, well, I'm in med school, but I got spring break coming up. So she was like, great, I'll meet you in Nashville for your spring break. So I, you know, got my Datsun, 82 Datsun, and drove to Nashville for my spring break. And just, she got me in some meetings and, you know, with some record labels, and they all kind of patted me on the head and said, nice to meet you, you know, thanks for coming. And then randomly, we kind of done all our meetings, and randomly we kind of were playing for another friend of hers, and he was like, you know, I think Tim Dubois, who's the head of Arista, would like this. This is the way Nashville used to work, man. He literally, like, we're on Music Row, and I played for this guy named Cliff Aldrich, who was an A&R guy, kind of manager type. And Cliff picks up the phone, he calls Tim Dubois, the president of Arista, and he said, I got this kid who's really good. And Tim's like, bring him over. So literally,
it's crazy.
It's crazy. We literally walk up the street, you know, I'm carrying my guitar, I got my cowboy hat on, the whole bit. And we walk up the street, and I go in and play these songs for the head of Arista Records at that time, who was the best and biggest record label in Nashville.
Sure.
And Tim looks across the desk, and he goes, mister? He goes, if you move here, I'll give you a record deal. Just like that. I've been in Nashville for 3 days, you know?
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, wow, let me think about this, because I'm in med school. I think this is a big shift. So what I ended up doing was I finished that year of med school, took my board exams. You have to take boards after your sophomore years. And the next day I got back in my 82 Datsun and I drove to Nashville. I told med school I was taking a year off. Mm-hmm. You know, I was going to sabbatical or whatever. And they'd let you take 1 year off. So I said, I'm going to take the year off and see if I can go try this. Thinking that, you know, literally I'd know in a year, which, you know, everybody knows, this doesn't happen in music business. You know, it's much slower than that. And so, I moved to Nashville, and I didn't call Tim Dubois, the head of that label, for 9 months after I moved to town, because I just instinctively knew I wasn't ready to have a record deal. I knew I wasn't, you know, I cut 5 songs. I didn't know what I was doing, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I waited tables and actually got a publishing deal. So I got somebody to kind of pay me to start learning how to write songs. And about 9 months later, which has been a year since I had that meeting with him, I called him and I was like, I don't even know if you remember who I am, but about a year ago, you said if I move here, you give me a record deal.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, I remember you. Come on, come on in. I went in and played him some more songs and you know, did the whole showcase thing, and he ended up signing me to Arista that, you know, pretty soon thereafter. And that's where my artist career of failure started, and that's how I ended up being a songwriter, because I proceeded after that, I got signed by Arista in 93. And I was on the label for 4 years, probably till 97. But my singles wouldn't hit the 20s, and it was like you made a whole record and it's in Walmart for a minute, and then my singles kind of stiffed, and then, okay, we got to change producers. We're going to make another record, blah, blah, blah. So I spent the next 4 years kind of failing miserably as a recording artist. And that's how I ended up being a songwriter. I was one of those artists that failed miserably.
But then obviously you could write, because you've wrote so many hits and so many singles for other artists.
It's funny. What happened? Just like I said, this is a really long story, but I'll just tell you anyway. So I've been in Nashville for 7 years, and for the first 4 or 5, because I had this guy Tim Dubois telling everybody I was the next Garth Brooks. When he said it, they believed it. So I'm making great money. I'm like got a 6-figure publishing deal, and everybody's telling me I'm going to be a big deal, and then it all doesn't work, and it all kind of comes crashing down. And so, I moved to Nashville in 92, and all of a sudden it's 1999, and I've been in town 7 years. I've lost my record deal. My publishing deal money had been cut by like 2/3, but I did at least still have a small publishing deal. And it was the late 90s, and in Nashville, this is a long time ago, but the early 90s were like the boom of country, like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, and all this just exploded. Well, the late 90s, Nashville started dying. Pop music took over, and it was Britney Spears and NSYNC. And so all our sales started crashing, and pop took over. And so Nashville literally, in that period in the late 90s, went from about 11 or 1,200 full-time songwriters to something like 250. So songwriters were all of a sudden just losing jobs left and right, and it was kind of the incredible shrinking town. And here I was, no record deal, new small publishing deal, but nothing really going on. And I'm 30 years old, and I had 2 babies to feed, And so I sort of had this, I don't know what you sort of an oh shit moment, I literally was standing in Target one time, and I don't know that I've ever had a panic attack, but if I have, this was it. I was standing in Target, and I was like looking at this pair of cute little baby shoes, and I'm thinking, man, I'd love to buy those for my son, but I can't afford them, and I'm not going to live like this. I've got to figure this out. All of a sudden it became my music dream was like, okay, whatever it takes. It became I'm going to figure out how to feed my kids' dream, and at that point in your life, that's sort of all that matters. And so what I did was I snail mailed a letter back to the dean of the med school, and because there wasn't any email even back then. That's how old I am. And so I snail mailed this letter back to her and say, look, I know it's been 7 years since I've been in med school, but is there any chance I can come back? And she wrote me back. She said, well, you had good grades, and yes, you can come back, but you have to repeat your sophomore year again. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because lots changed in medicine in 7 years, and you need to get back up to speed. And I was like, fine. I was like, I'll do it. As long as, because that at least allowed me to think, I'm going to have a job. At some point, I'll actually have a job that I can feed my family with.
Sure.
And it was a huge load off my shoulders. So I left. My ex-wife and my kids stayed back to sell the house that we had at the time. I drive back to Oklahoma, move into my parents' house until we could sell my Nashville house and start back into med school at 30 years, and, it's going to take a long time. I was going to be 36 or 7 by the time I finished all this stuff and was actually a real doctor. But I was like, so what? I'll be able to feed my kids. Well, what happened was then sort of God had other plans. One of those stories.
Sure.
I had signed this little publishing deal. I was their only writer, and I take the owner of the company to breakfast one day, and I said, look, I know I'm your only writer. I know you just signed me, but I'm sorry, I got kids to feed, and I'm going to go back to medical school. His name's Mark Bright. He's kind of famous in Nashville, produced all the Carrie Underwood records and things like that.
Wow.
And so I say to Mark, man, I tell him that, and he's like, look, I got kids. I totally get it. No worries. You got a contract for the next year. Just write whatever songs you can in Oklahoma while you're going to school, and we'll figure it out. And at the same time, I'd had this co-writer, a guy named Troy Verdes, who's one of my best friends in the world. He was like a 24-year-old kid, and we started writing together a little bit and started getting a little heat in Nashville on our songs. Hadn't got any cuts, but people were just taking interest. We were kind of writing cool kid stuff, you know? And so I tell Troy the same thing. I said, I know we're starting to get a little heat, but I got to go to med school to make sure I feed my kids. And Troy's like, dude, I'll just fly out there. So he would fly to Oklahoma for a week and stay with me in my parents' house. I go to med school like until 2 p.m, and we'd write songs until midnight every night, you know, and write 7 or 8 songs in a week. And I'd fly back to Nashville and we'd demo them up, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, we end up getting like 33 of those songs cut in the next 9 months. And like, I literally went back to started med school on September 1st. On September 4th, Faith Hill killed one of our songs on the Breathe album that sold 8 million copies.
Oh and then, my God.
Like every week I'm getting a call from Kelly King, who was my song plugger. And she's going, dude, Tim McGraw just cut a song, or, you know, Martina McBride just cut a song, or Kenny Chesney, or whoever. And it was like, I'd be in like the library, and, you know, I'd step out and take my call on my flip phone, and then, you know, I just be looking around, like kind of jumping up and down. There's nobody to tell, you know.
Right.
I go back to studying pathology right now, but so all that to say, we had just an amazing run that year, and I ended up finishing that year of med school, took my exams again, and went back to the same dean and said, I know you pulled a lot of strings. I love you back in. You did me this favor, but I'm quitting for the second time, you know? And turns out the funny thing about that little conversation was I walk into her office, and I'd done my homework. I had all the songs that I'd had recorded that year, you know, on a sheet of paper and who'd cut them and all that. I kind of said, look, I know, like I said, you pulled a lot of strings to get me back in school, but I kind of slid the sheet over and I said, here's what's going on with my music career. Turns out she's a huge country music fan. So she looks at the sheet. She's like, oh, I love that song. I love that song. These are great. And she was like, well, you got to go do this. And then she stopped for a minute. She goes, but you can't ever come back. And I was like, done. I'm done. So
that's funny.
That's great. That's 20 years ago now. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then just been writing songs ever since, and have, you know, now I've been lucky, over 500 of them recorded.
Right. I was going to say, you've wrote so many hits. Was that Faith Hill was the first cut you had?
You know, she wasn't the first. She was the first one in that run. I think when I went back to school, I had 2 outside cuts ever. One was Kenny Chesney, and I can't remember who the other one was, but that's about it. I hadn't had a whole lot of luck up to that point.
Yeah, but I mean, even getting one, that must have been really cool. They're not easy to land the first one. Yeah.
Sure, man. They're not easy to get, you know, and they're still not easy to get. I think they're harder now than almost ever. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I still love getting to do it every day.
Yeah. What were you going to medical school for, if you don't mind me asking?
I wanted to be an ER doc. You know.
Okay.
My dad and grandfather were both docs. My grandfather was a surgeon. My dad was a general practitioner, and I thought ER stuff sounded cool. And I'd worked in college, and I just thought that sounded cool. Who knows? I might have changed my mind somewhere.
Yeah. Adrenaline rush of
exactly.
People running in there. Yeah, that could be exciting.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That was the plan.
Yeah. So you're still in Nashville now?
Yeah.
And still writing and
doing all the stuff, you know. Yeah, it's you know, it kind of expands and grows. I've been lucky enough for like 15 years to have my own publishing company that I started years ago called Cornman Music, and we've had some amazing writers come through our doors. So right now I think we have 7 or 8 amazingly talented writers. Kip Moores, Caitlin Smith, people like that have come through our my little company, and so that's really fun.
I know. I've interviewed Caitlin Smith.
Yeah,
she's really cool.
She's awesome. I'm such a fan, and so we're lucky enough to sign here a long time ago, and got some amazing talented writers now. A guy named Josh Miller who's just crushing it, and I'm actually managing an artist now, a guy named Drew Green on RCA. I'm really excited about that.
Wow.
So, you know, I'm still writing every day, but it kind of mix it up with some other stuff.
Yeah, venturing out in the industry a little bit. I like that. That's cool. Yeah. So, you enjoy developing, like, you know, managing the newer artists?
I do. I'm really loving managing Drew. He's really the first one I've ever said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to, you know, take the time and really and be an official manager, you know. And so it's a little bit scary, you know, because you know, but it's also it's fantastic. He's such I think such a sure thing kind of talent. I think he'll be a superstar very soon, and he's such a hard worker and such an easy guy to work with. I just couldn't say no to doing it. And
sure,
it's yeah, so far we're just having a blast. I mean, so far it's just been nothing but fantastic. He's signed to RCA, but he's also a co-venture with Justin Timberlake's record label, which is called Villa 40.
Oh, wow.
So we got a really cool team with Drew, and I'm just excited about doing that. And for me, it's just a different part of my brain. You know, it's something,
sure.
different challenges. It's a lot of texting and phone calls, and, you know, doing stuff like I did this morning, like missing meetings or forgetting.
There you go.
Sorry, you know, I'm the manager's supposed to remember this kind of stuff. You know? So once again, shoot me.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brett. I appreciate it.
Appreciate the talk, man. So once again, sorry I was late.
Oh, all good, dude. All
Who's
good.
up on your wall up there? Who are the girls in the background? Is that the family, or is that?
No, this is a band. Okay. This is a band. They're out of Canada. They're called the Beaches.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
I had that. Cool shot.
Thank you.
Great to meet you, brother.
All right, Brett, have a good one, man.
Bringing it backwards.